I can still feel the sting in my chest from the moment he pushed that document across the desk. No eye contact, no explanation, just a quiet shove that told me exactly how replaceable he thought I was. 7 years of carrying that place on my shoulders, reduced to a footnote in one meeting. I walked out holding more rage than I knew how to handle, and one truth he never saw coming. I didn't realize how close I was to breaking until the morning everything finally snapped. For 7 years, I showed up before anyone else, cleaned up whatever disaster was waiting on my desk, and silently saved projects my boss, Miles Thatcher, was too busy bragging about to understand. I wasn't a hero, just the person who fixed things after everyone else failed, and that was my mistake, believing quiet competence would ever matter in a place that rewarded noise. That day, I walked into the office with my usual coffee, mentally bracing for another round of damage control. The floor was unusually silent, the kind that makes you feel like you've stepped into the wrong building. People glanced at me, then looked away. That should have been my warning. Miles's assistant said he wanted to see me immediately, her voice tight like she already knew something I didn't. I walked down the same hallway I'd walked thousands of times before, but something felt off, heavy. Miles sat behind his glass desk scrolling on his phone, didn't even say good morning, just tilted his chin at the chair. Before I could sit, he slid a folder across the polished surface, no greeting, no context, and in that single motion I felt the first crack form inside me. I opened it expecting contract updates, a shift in duties, maybe even recognition for the crisis I'd fixed the night before. Instead, I saw reassignment. I blinked, read it again, felt heat crawl up my neck. My title was gone. My responsibilities were crossed out, and underneath, centered like a reward, was a single line. Effective immediately, Hannah will transition into workflow support under Junior Innovation Lead Tyler Marks. 24-year-old Tyler, the intern hired because his uncle golfed with the board, the kid who once asked if supply chain visibility meant turning on more lights. I stared at Miles, waiting for a laugh, a joke, anything. But he leaned back with a faint smirk and called it a strategic restructuring, said I'd be helping Tyler ramp up. Helping. Ramping up. Demoted to assisting a kid who couldn't send a complete email without asking how to attach a file. Something deep inside me shifted, years of pressure finally starting to split. I'd held departments together while Miles took victory laps, built client trust while he mangled metrics, given this place every ounce of stability it had. And now I was reporting to Tyler because Miles wanted someone younger, shinier, easier to control. I didn't argue, cry, or beg. I closed the folder and set it back on his desk. That was the last moment he ever saw me as someone he could break, because something inside me had already begun to wake up. I walked out of his office feeling like my bones were humming. I'd handled unfair deadlines, midnight crisis calls, half-finished proposals dumped on me with an, "I trust you to fix this," but nothing compared to being told I'd answer to a kid who still used LOL in professional emails. I wasn't angry yet. Shock numbs you first, but by the time I reached my desk, the humiliation settled over me like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. People were watching, pretending they weren't, but absolutely watching. You learn to read office silence after enough years in corporate America, and I knew that look. The mix of guilt, curiosity, and relief that it wasn't happening to them. A few eyes flicked away as I passed. Someone whispered in the break room, and then came the final blow. Tyler appeared at my desk, shirt slightly rumpled, hair a mess, sneakers squeaking against the cheap carpet. He lifted his hand in a half-wave, half-high five, then instantly seemed to regret it. "Hey, Hannah," he said, his voice cracking with the unsure confidence of someone who didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified. "Miles told me the news." I said nothing. He shifted awkwardly. Um, so I guess you'll be showing me, like, everything. Everything. I almost laughed. Years of systems, vendor relationships, crisis management protocols, budgets, workflows, client expectations, everything. I had built a machine out of chaos, piece by piece, and he expected me to hand over the keys like this was a school project. I kept my voice steady. What exactly did Miles tell you I'd be doing? His face lit up, proud in a way that made my stomach twist. That you'd train me to take over your department. Not support. Not collaborate. Take over. My jaw tightened for half a second before I forced it to loosen. When do you want to start? He shrugged. Now? Of course. I grabbed my laptop and followed him to a conference room with flickering lights and a table too small for real collaboration. He sat down, spinning slightly in his chair, while I opened my files. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands. Or maybe he did and assumed it was fear. I began explaining the basics: our scheduling system, vendor logs, the escalation matrix. After 10 minutes, his eyes glazed over. This is a lot, he muttered. Yeah, I said. It is. He rubbed the back of his neck. I mean, why didn't Miles just put you in charge? You know all this. A simple, innocent question, and yet it cut deeper than anything Miles had said. Because he could, I answered. I didn't tell him that men like Miles didn't value quiet competence. They valued people who reflected their ego back at them. Tyler wasn't qualified, but he was young, male, eager, and malleable. The kind of person a weak leader keeps close so he can pretend he's strong. We went through 3 hours of training. 3 hours of me compressing 7 years of structure for someone who kept forgetting what tab he'd clicked 5 seconds earlier. At one point, he asked if I could slow down. At another, if we could skip the boring parts. The boring parts were what kept the company from collapsing, but sure, boring. When I finally dismissed him for the day, he stood, stretched, and said, "Thanks, Hannah. I know this is weird for you, but it'll work out." Then he gave me a thumbs up. A thumbs up. The humiliation was complete. Watching him walk away, I felt something shift. Something painful, necessary, and final. I realized Miles hadn't demoted me because I failed. He did it because he assumed I would accept it. Quietly, gratefully, without resistance. That was the last moment I let humiliation define me, because beneath the shame, something powerful was beginning to rise. My breaking point was turning into the edge of something I had never dared imagine, and none of them, Miles, Tyler, or anyone watching from the sidelines, had any idea what was coming. I drove home that night with my hands clenched around the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, didn't even let myself cry. I just kept replaying the same humiliating sentence in my head: "You'll be training Tyler to take over your department," until the words felt carved into me. I walked into my apartment, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat in the dark for a long time, the kind of long where silence starts to feel loud. That's when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. I was too exhausted to deal with another crisis or another apology message from someone who felt bad but wouldn't actually do anything. But the buzzing continued. Finally, I glanced at the screen. Serena Vale. I'd met her once, months earlier, at a regional logistics panel, the only speaker who talked like she truly understood the work instead of hiding behind buzzwords. I remembered thinking she was sharp, even intimidating, the kind of person who expected others to rise to her level. She'd introduced herself after my Q&A contribution and said, "You see things clearly. I like that." I never thought she'd remember me, but there was her name glowing on my phone. Her message was simple. "Hannah, are you free this week? I've been following your work. I'd like to talk." I stared at the text, feeling something I hadn't felt all day: curiosity. I replied before I could overthink it. "I'm free tomorrow." She answered instantly. "Coffee, 10 a.m. No pressure, no pressure." 2 words I hadn't heard in years. The next morning, I walked into a small cafe on the riverfront, the kind that smelled like roasted beans and old wood, warm and grounding. Serena was already there, leaning over her laptop, dark hair pulled back, no blazer, no performance, just someone who looked like she built things instead of pretending to. She stood when she saw me. "Hannah, thanks for coming." Her handshake was firm and confident, the opposite of Miles's limp attempt at dominance. We sat, and she got straight to the point. "I've watched several of the projects you turned around. Quietly. I know your work better than you think." I blinked. "How?" She smiled. "People talk. Vendors talk. Clients talk. You've built a reputation whether your boss acknowledges it or not." My chest tightened. No one had ever said that to me out loud. She turned her laptop toward me, a document open on the screen. "This is a proposal for Northbridge's next expansion phase. I need someone skilled, calm under pressure, and someone who knows how to run an operation without drama." She paused. "I want you." The words hit harder than I expected. "In what role?" "Leadership," she said. "Real leadership. Not behind-the-scenes cleanup. You'd have authority, budget, a team you build from scratch, and equity. I don't offer that lightly." I swallowed, my mind trying to protect itself by saying I can't just leave, while my heart had already leapt forward. She studied me for a moment. "I know that look," she said softly. "You're too loyal for your own good." It felt like she'd read a page straight out of my life. "Think about it," she added. "But know this: you deserve a place where your work isn't treated like background noise." I walked out of that cafe feeling something I hadn't felt in years: possibility. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the cracks inside me were starting to let in light, and the door Serena opened was one I could no longer pretend didn't exist. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was, I was stalling. Not because Serena's offer wasn't everything I'd ever wanted, but because leaving felt like tearing out a part of myself I'd spent 7 years holding together. Loyalty is a strange thing. It sinks roots into places that don't deserve it, and I'd let mine grow deep. So the next morning, I walked into the office pretending nothing had changed. I nodded at the receptionist, logged into my computer, organized my files. I even answered emails for Tyler, who had already forgotten half of what I'd taught him. I went through all the familiar motions, but something inside me felt detached, like I was watching someone else perform the routine. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. That week, I worked late 3 nights in a row, not because I wanted to, but because of the disasters piling up around me: a vendor invoice Miles had approved without reading, a client escalation Tyler answered with a tone-deaf message that felt like a prank, a supply coordination spreadsheet overwritten because someone didn't understand shared files. None of it was my fault, but all of it became my responsibility. As always, the worst part wasn't the mess. It was realizing I'd been doing this for years without ever calling it what it was: survival. I wasn't building anything. I was holding broken pieces together while other people took bows, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. On Wednesday night, I stayed past 10 rewriting a shipment schedule Tyler had managed to delete while experimenting with shortcuts. The office was empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they were exhausted too. I sat there staring at the glowing screen, hands cold, head pounding, thinking about Serena's words. "You deserve a place where your work isn't treated like background noise." Background noise. That was exactly what I'd become here. A constant hum that kept everything running while the people in front pretended to matter. I was still staring at the mess when Miles barged in the next morning wearing one of his performative frowns. "Hannah, The board wants an updated status report, he announced as if I should know what he meant. A report on what? I asked. Everything, he said. Operations, vendor delays, client satisfaction. Just whip something up. Whip something up? As if a full analysis of half the company's workflow was something I could throw together in an afternoon. The meeting's in 2 hours, he added, and I want it polished. I looked at him, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. He truly believed I could read his mind, fix every mistake, and make it perfect before lunch because that's what I'd always done. He had no idea what it cost me. I opened my laptop while he hovered behind me, pretending to supervise. "You need to move faster," he muttered. Faster. My pulse slammed. For a moment, I imagined turning around and telling him exactly who he was and what he'd done to me, but I didn't. I just breathed slowly and kept typing. As he walked away, my phone buzzed. A message from Serena. Checking in. No rush. Just want you to know the door is open. No pressure, no demands, no hovering, just respect. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. That message felt like a lifeline, and I wasn't ready to admit how much I needed it. That night, driving home, the truth finally hit me. Loyalty wasn't what was keeping me there anymore. Fear was. Fear of leaving. Fear of starting over. Fear that maybe Miles was right, and I wasn't leadership material. But then I remembered the look in Serena's eyes, the kind that saw potential instead of utility. And for the first time, I wondered what my life might look like if I stopped surviving and started choosing myself. That question stayed with me long after the office lights disappeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't plan to quit that night. I didn't drive home thinking, "This is it." I didn't feel brave or bold or empowered. I felt exhausted, bone-deep tired, the kind that makes you forget who you were before you started shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. But something inside me finally slipped when I got home. I dropped my bag on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and stared at the wall like it might tell me what to do. My laptop sat on the coffee table, screen still open from earlier. I walked toward it slowly, almost on autopilot, like my body knew what needed to happen before my mind did. I sat down, opened a blank document, and typed 2 words. Dear Miles. The rest came out fast. Not angry, not emotional, just quietly resolved, the way a structure gives way after too much weight for too long. I wrote that I was resigning effective 2 weeks from today. I thanked him for the opportunity, even though the word tasted bitter. I wished the team well. I kept it clean, professional, polite, the kind of letter you write when you're walking away from 7 years of your life. When I finished, I read it twice, not to edit it, but because part of me couldn't believe I'd actually written it. Then I printed it, set the page gently on my dining table, and felt a strange calm settle over me. I realized I wasn't shaking, I wasn't crying, I wasn't afraid. I was done, and that was enough. I fell asleep faster than I had in months, the letter resting on my nightstand like a quiet promise. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, 15 minutes ahead of time as always. Not for them, but for me. Habit, I guess. I walked past the break room where 2 analysts pretended not to stare, past the cubicles where people whispered the moment they thought I couldn't hear. I walked straight to Miles's office door, already open, and found him on a call, pacing and gesturing like he was delivering a TED Talk instead of explaining why he'd lost track of a client contract. He saw me, lifted one finger, and mouthed 1 second, like I was interrupting his brilliance. That tiny gesture, the finger, the dismissiveness, snapped the last thread holding the old version of me in place. When he finally hung up, he pointed at the chair. "What do you need, Hannah? I'm swamped." I didn't sit. I stepped forward, placed the printed resignation letter in the center of his desk, and waited. It took a moment for it to register. His smirk faded, his eyebrows twitched, his expression rearranging into something sour. "What is this?" he asked tightly. "My resignation," I said calmly. "Effective 2 weeks from today." He blinked. "You're quitting?" "Yes, because of the restructuring, among other things." He leaned back with a scoff. "You're being dramatic. This makes you look weak. Running because you didn't get your way." I met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not running, Miles. I'm leaving. There's a difference." He opened his mouth, probably reaching for something cutting he'd later call mentorship, but nothing came out. He just sat there, deflated. I turned toward the door. "I'll finish my 2 weeks professionally. After that, I'm done." I didn't wait for permission or a reaction. I walked past the cubicles, past the whispers, past the people suddenly very focused on their keyboards. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release, like my body finally realized the cage door was open. By lunchtime, half the office knew. Some avoided me. Some looked at me with envy. A few, like Elise, pulled me aside and whispered, "Are you really leaving?" I didn't explain. I didn't brag. I just said it was time. And for once, those words felt true. My last day came with no cake, no card, no awkward group photo. Just silence. Fitting. I packed slowly, not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to feel every second of leaving. Walking out of that building felt like stepping out of a storm I hadn't realized I'd been living in for years. The next Monday, I walked into Northbridge, and if my old office felt like a cage, this place felt like oxygen. Glass walls, warm light, a real desk, and a team that actually looked up when I entered. Serena met me with 2 coffees. "First day," she said. "Let's get you set up." No checklist shoved at me, no expectation to clean up a mess before proving myself. She introduced me to the team one by one, every interaction grounded and respectful. By the end of the week, I was already reviewing 2 major accounts my old company had clearly mishandled. On my first client call, the representative, Mara, leaned closer to her camera. "Wait," she said. "You're with Northbridge now?" "Yes," I replied. "Good to see you again." Her shoulders dropped in visible relief. "Thank God," Mara said. "I've been trying to get answers from your old team for weeks. Nothing but delays and excuses." Serena shot me a knowing look, but stayed silent as Mara walked us through misrouted shipments, missed deadlines, invoices sent twice, or not at all. Every problem I used to prevent before they ever reached a client. I guided her through a solution step by step, and by the end of the call, she signed a contract with Northbridge, not because I pushed, but because she trusted me. That was how it began, slowly at first. A few messages from former clients, a referral here, a quiet inquiry there. Someone from a mid-sized distribution firm emailed, "Heard through the grapevine you made a move. Smart." Another message followed. "Hope you're still in operations. Our team could use someone who actually listens." None of it felt like revenge. It felt like gravity. People are drawn to stability. And I'd been that stability for years while Miles pretended to be the architect behind it all. Without me, the cracks showed faster than I expected. One afternoon after lunch, my phone rang. Jonah, one of the few decent people left at my old office. His voice sounded strained, like he was calling from inside a collapsing building. "Hannah, it's bad." "What happened?" "Everything. 3 people quit last week, 2 more this morning. Tyler screwed up a vendor contract so badly the entire Midwest supply line is frozen. Customers are furious. Miles spent an hour yelling about sabotage." "Sabotage?" Jonah let out a hollow laugh. "He thinks you orchestrated it." I let the silence sit. I trained Tyler for one afternoon, Jonah. That's the last thing I did for that company. I know. He sighed. But he's unraveling. No direction, no answers, just chaos. I expected to feel triumphant, like this was poetic justice, but instead I felt something quieter. Confirmation. I hadn't imagined the weight I carried. I hadn't exaggerated the dysfunction. I hadn't been dramatic or sensitive. I'd been right. A week later, Elise called. No small talk. I'm leaving, she whispered. I can't work under someone who screams at everyone and then hides in his office. I didn't tell her what to do. I just said, you deserve better. She cried soft, exhausted tears because sometimes permission is all people need. Meanwhile, Northbridge grew. 2 new coordinators, another analytics lead. Serena pulled me into every strategic meeting like I belonged there, and for the first time, I did. Every client I onboarded felt like a door opening. Every problem I solved felt like reclaiming something I'd lost long before Miles ever slid that folder across his desk. I didn't need to watch his world collapse to feel vindicated. I just needed to stand somewhere I was finally seen. The collapse was happening without me. The rise, that part, I had earned. I didn't expect to see Miles again, not so soon, and definitely not at one of those overpriced industry mixers where everyone pretends they aren't silently judging each other. Serena and I had just finished a pitch when I spotted him across the room. He looked smaller, shoulders hunched, eyes sunken, his suit hanging like it belonged to someone else. The man who once strutted through hallways as if the world owed him applause now looked like he was barely holding himself together. The moment he saw me, something in him snapped. He cut through a cluster of executives mid-conversation, practically stumbling toward me. Hannah, he hissed, breath sharp. We need to talk. No, I said quietly. We don't. His face twisted. You think this is funny? You think you won? The desperation in his voice was louder than his words. I kept mine calm. This was never a game. You destroyed my company. He snapped, loud enough to silence half the room. Conversation stalled. Eyes turned. For a moment, the entire mixer seemed to hold its breath. I tilted my head. I didn't destroy anything, Miles. I just stopped holding everything together. The hush that followed felt like a door closing. He stared at me, fury draining into something hollow, something defeated. When he finally stepped back, it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because he had nothing left to fight with. Serena touched my arm gently. You ready to go? I nodded. More than ready. By the end of that quarter, Northbridge had doubled its growth. Serena offered me equal partnership. My name went on the letterhead next to hers, and somewhere in the background of my life, Miles's world kept collapsing without me lifting a single finger. Legacy isn't about who shouts the loudest when they're on top. It's about who's still standing when the noise fades. And I am still standing. Looking back, what stands out isn't the collapse of Miles's company. It's how long I stayed somewhere that refused to see me. My biggest lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. I spent years telling myself loyalty mattered more than respect, that patience would be rewarded, that being dependable was enough. But the truth I finally faced was this. You can't save a place determined to ignore the hands holding it up. I learned that walking away doesn't make you weak. It frees you to rise. And not every battle needs a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave quietly and let people live with the consequences they created. People like Miles don't collapse because you push them. They collapse because the scaffolding they built on other people's labor was never strong. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. I don't hate him. I don't need to. Life handled what I never had to touch. What matters now is what I built afterward. The peace, the confidence, the validation that came not from revenge, but from finally choosing myself. For anyone living something similar right now, here's what I want you to know. You don't owe lifelong loyalty to places that treat you as replaceable. You don't need permission to leave environments that shrink you. You're not dramatic for expecting respect. You're human. Today's workplaces move fast, change fast, and sometimes break people in the process. Your responsibility is not to keep them running at the cost of your sanity. Your responsibility is to protect the parts of yourself that make you valuable. Your clarity, your strength, your voice. How to get started today. Write down 3 things you bring to your job that no one sees. Identify one boundary you've been afraid to set, and practice saying it out loud. Reach out to someone who values your work. Connection can be a lifeline. Start updating your resume, even if you're not ready to move yet. If this story speaks to what you're going through, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, share, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.